Hi, welcome to Tantric Live Talks. I'm Avi Esther, and I have with me today the very beautiful Wendy, and we will be talking about conscious pleasure. Now, I know Wendy from Clubhouse, where I'm often found talking about all sorts of things, including psychedelics, Tantra, and, awakening consciousness and what's going on in the world. I really love the Clubhouse community, and I am so deeply glad that I got to meet Wendy through that community and that connection. And we've had such delicious conversations that we decided to come here live on Facebook to share this very juicy conversation about conscious pleasure. Hi, Wendy. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing wonderful. As anytime I am, I get to talk to you.
Thanks. So, all right, let's dive in. Let's see here. Hold on. I'm just looking to make sure that we are streaming on my page because we're doing it a little bit differently today. Where
Here, let me put it
where
in the chat for you so you can see it if I can find the chat for you.
sorry,
There we
I've
go.
got it here.
Okay.
So awesome. This is super cool. Wow. All right.
So
Very
if you're
cool.
watching it on my page, then that's because we're using a software that's letting us go to both places. And you might even be watching it on YouTube right now, live.
Oh, wow. Let's jump in. So I know that you work with women specifically around pleasure and orgasm. And I'm just really curious if you would at least let my audience know a little bit about you and your background in this work with conscious pleasure and orgasm with women.
Ooh, okay. So I started God, like it's so hard. Like where do we start from? So I started from a very like physical body, wanting to understand everything about the body and how it works. So I dove deep into like the orgasm side of stuff and like the actual physical pleasure in that component. And as I learn more things because I wanted to learn all these different methods. And I figured there's this ancient wisdom that's out there talking about pleasure and talking about orgasms and everything. And I knew there had to be truth in those too, not just the research studies. And I started seeing all these patterns of all the different traditions and how they came together, which I know you're very versed in Tantra and some of those traditions. And that kind of started the evolution towards the understanding of the connection of the different parts of self, which is what consciousness is bringing those elements of yourself together.
Beautiful. So within this spectrum of awareness, right, where we're looking and focusing on pleasure, of course, pain comes up, right? The opposite side of that coin. And what do you find is the biggest inhibition for women and men to experiencing pleasure, not just, in their genitals, but in life or in general?
Um, so the cool thing, not cool thing, but very simplistic thing about the body is there is two pathways of activity. One is pleasure, one is pain. And it's really quite that binary actually. Like most things in our body are either on or off, in, out, sympathetic, parasympathetic. There's this duality within our body that always exists. And the thing about it is like as you start doing more activity towards that pain part, and for pain I don't even necessarily mean physical pain. It could be emotional pain, spiritual pain, mental pain, however you want to think about it. The part of your brain that interprets the signals, the pain signals, is the same regardless of where that pain source is. So when there is information that is getting interpreted as pain, there are then actions that your body takes to deal with that pain. But when there's information that is taken in as pleasure, there are actions that the body takes to like receive that pleasure. And it really is this kind of energy, like the pain, your body does this like forward action. And with the pleasure, it's a receiving action. And most of us are so used to doing, going. Let me fix the pain. Let me deal with this. Let me deal with this. That unintentionally, they keep creating these patterns and habits of pain versus the patterns and habits of receiving pleasure. Did that kind of answer
So
your question?
I'm just
Yeah.
gonna feed that back. So the part of our brain that interprets, that sends the messages to our body, the pain and pleasure is the same area. So
Yeah.
we are in choice of how we interpret it, and how we choose to interpret the sensation is what then our body will give us as the experience.
Yes. So yeah, more or less. So there's, I mean, there's nothing like really simple about the body. It's either like super simple explanation or a really complicated explanation half the time. But it is, yeah, you know what the way you said it, that basically is right. Just sometimes I get lost in the science because I want to be like, no, it goes over to the corpus callosum and like going into the different parts of the body, the brain. But it's like it's called the aqueductal. Oh my God, PAG is the abbreviation right now. The words are not coming up.
It's okay.
That's the pain center, and it's because of the information that the body sends up, and then the brain recognizes the signals, and then based on events of the past, knows how to interpret them as either a pain, something that you must take action on, or a pleasure, something that you stop and receive.
Mm. Okay. So when these different signaling processes happen within the body, um, I feel anyway, within my experience, that often we get sort of caught up in the meanings of those things and stuck in patterns of pain, whether
Yeah.
again that's mental, emotional, or physical. And so, one of the juicy things that we can dive into in this conversation is how do we get super conscious in how we relate to the experiences we're having so that we can experience more
Mm.
pleasure and be able to receive pain in a way which is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say for me, that's, I mean, I'm still practicing, right? It's
Aren't
a
we
fairly,
all?
I hope I'm practicing until, you know, I think that's the journey of life, right? Like you keep practicing stuff and getting better and better and better, you know? But for me, the big thing that really helped is kind of understanding a little bit about the processes of my body. That's one of the
Mm,
reasons why I come from this very like scientific, like here's the information, because once I understood this is just the way my body works, like this is the way bodies work, this is how they're designed to work, then there's no longer this fight against what's happening, and there's an acceptance that
mm,
I was able to allow, and then had fun figuring out, how do I work this now? Like now that I know what I'm working with, let's let's have some fun with this. Like how do we change this? How do we shift more from, always being in anxiety and constant to receiving that? And that's the consciousness part of it. Um, I think that for me, the knowledge allowed me this ability to consciously like take a moment to stop and receive and notice what was happening,
mm,
and then be able to do something. Like it's not that action is like always towards pain or always towards pleasure. Action is action, but it's that process of stopping that is super essential in order to make changes in your body and make new pathways towards pleasure.
So, and I love this because often in these conversations, we come back to this space of slowing down. So, when we slow down, we enable ourselves to bring in consciousness. So with regard to pleasure, let's pull an example out of the air, because that's what's coming to my head right now. Yeah. So within pain and pleasure. So if there's a sensation that I'm receiving that feels painful, and instead of going into that reaction action, I slow down. And how do I slow down? So breath, taking a moment. Sometimes I shake, like I'll just, and really my energy is directed down into grounding, because that's for me the best way to slow down and to really catch myself and feel safe.
Yes.
And it's that feeling of safety that helps me to say, okay, is what's happening right now really painful? Or is there something that's stored from the past that is being triggered? And then I get to ask these questions to myself and deepen the trust and relationship. And then often what happens is I feel so grateful that I've shown up for me, that whatever that sensation is that I was about to move into like full reaction to shifts into pleasure. And that comes in a variety of different ways that feels playful.
Yes. Yes. I love what you just said right there, because you basically outlined the biological processes in that moment. So the the biggest driving factor of all of our behavior is safety. And usually that safety can be like physically in your body, it can be emotional safety, and it can be mental safety and spiritual safety and social safety, right? Like how you safely feel with others. And so that practice that you have of grounding and that, creates an anchor point to the electromagnetic energy of the earth, and actually will change and alter the your nervous system and create that feeling of safety, because it actually starts to turn down the precortical limbic system, which is our fear center. And when you do that, that's why those pauses are so important. Is it's one thing to pause. It's the first step, right? Pause. But then it's creating that safety for yourself. And once you develop these practices that create safety for yourself, that opens up so many avenues of receiving pleasure at that point.
Beautiful. So I love the way that you brought in the neuroscience to these topics that we've really been investigating here in the Tantric Live Talks for a few weeks now. And there's like, so what I notice is when people are hearing myself or you talk in these ways, essentially about our neurobiology and our parasympathetic and sympathetic interactions, they tend to tune out. And they're just kind of like, oh, neuroscience. Where you and I are like, oh, neuroscience. Oh, my pleasure's up right now. Tell me more about the brain.
Regulate my nervous system, please. Oh, yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, let's talk about neuroregulation. Oh, I'm game. And everybody else is like,
Yeah.
cortex, limbic, what?
Right.
So
Yeah, I like to use common words for stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so the fun thing here that I'm curious about, and I'd love it if anybody who's watching is like, ooh, okay, I kind of get what's going on here, and I have some questions, or I have some experiences that I'd like to share. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Really, this is an interactive space, so say hello. So I'm wondering, and this is totally a spontaneous idea. I wonder about gamifying what we're talking about. So easy, fun ways that we can pause, collect that safety, and then choose consciously an action which feels better.
Yes, yes, yes. So I love that you said gamify, because the like I am convinced, like if there's just one thing that people could do that would completely alter their life, because I've watched it happen over and over and over again, if they just, I say just like it's so super simple, but it kind of is in a way. But if you shift into curiosity instead of knowing, and
Mm.
once you make that shift into curiosity, it takes off all the pressure of having to figure things out and having to know what's the right answer. And it brings in that element of play. And when you shift into curiosity, you literally shift your brain from pain to pleasure.
Ooh, so when we get curious about something, we literally shift our neurobiology.
Yes.
So, okay, I love I oh bless we have somebody saying hi from Denmark. Beautiful. Hi, hi Miriam. Um, yeah, and again, for those of you who are tuning in, if you have any questions and or stories that you'd like to share, just say hi. Please do comment below because we'd love to hear from you. So we're investigating. We're getting curious about um, turning pain into pleasure through curiosity. And so, okay, what is a fun way that is easy for people to make shifts? Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
okay. We have some chatting. So what's the topic again? I didn't even see it. Fair enough. Fair enough. So today we're talking about conscious pleasure. And just to sort of really quickly fill you in, we started by talking about the neurobiology and the physiology of pain and pleasure, and how we can shift through curiosity into pleasure when we are experiencing a fear or pain triggered response. So that's what we're talking about right now.
Right this second.
Right this second. And I love it. She says, I'm curious. It's like perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, I mean, we can do examples or we can what are we
I
feeling right now? Let's engage our course.
I know. So like now I'm thinking about how, so just an example of being curious. This is, kind of going back into understanding the body, and why once I understood it, it kind of gave me that jumping off point to start playing with it.
Mm.
When emotions come up, it is a stored physical movement in your body that is releasing itself. And if you notice that you feel very emotional, even just being curious as to what that emotion is and identifying what that sensation that you're feeling in your body. Is it anger? Is it happiness? Is it joy? Is it frustration? What is it that you're actually experiencing? Most of the time we're talking about when you're feeling uncomfortable. So it just feels uncomfortable and we want it to stop, because that's how we're brought up and raised, to push our feelings aside and our emotions aside. So just stopping and noticing, like, oh, what emotion is this that's arising, right? And just shifting. And yes, it won't feel quite that like silly, but you can. And as you get more practice, you actually can become that playful with your emotions. And then understanding the mental energy is really about our perception and the meaning of events of our past. And so if a memory is coming up, so often we're always so trying to figure out the why. Why did this happen? Why is this coming up now? What? Right? Like there's always this why part, right? And really, actually, the gift and the memories that come up is telling you how you want to feel. So
Mm.
if you can get curious about your memories and start shifting into like, oh, this memory came up. What was I feeling in that memory? And
Mm.
I will give you a little like biohack into interpreting your memories. 90% of the time, it's you are feeling abandoned of some sort.
Mm.
Because it's our first instinct is as babies is to be part of the like we literally die if we're abandoned. So almost all of the like residual tension in our body stems from abandonment. But then you think about, okay, what do I want to feel instead? And then with play and curiosity, like, oh, how could I do that for myself right now? Like, how could I create that? Is there a shop, thought I could shift? Just so you know, that's my shorthand, shops. Is there a thought I could shift? Is there a fun activity I could do? Is there a way to ground in? Like, that is where that curiosity starts coming in. Once you start really leaning into that curiosity and start playing with what works for you, right?
Mm.
Like here's some of the great things from the people like, Avi Esther and Wendy Perkins and their suggestions. And then play around with them and see what works for you and see sometimes things work for you in certain kind of moments and sometimes they don't work for you in other kinds of moments. But just constantly play around and be curious and just know that every time you're curious and playing, you're in this path of healing.
Mm. I definitely noticed that in this conversation, while we're exploring these ideas, that there's a really interesting cycle that you and I are both doing. So I'm just bringing consciousness into this observation because I've noticed that when we are really, either of us, both of us, are really in our minds and delivering information, we both go quite still. And I'm experiencing that that somatic stillness as cooling or cold to my body.
Mm.
And then when we are actually more engaged here, eye to eye, as we are in this moment, that our bodies both start moving. And I notice that, there's this like kind of like activation that comes, and I notice this wave of heat in my body. And that feels really good. And I'm like, ooh, okay, yeah, more of that. And then I play with my hair, or I touch my skin, and suddenly I'm like, ooh, actually, I can feel how my pleasure receptors, even with the simplicity of touch, are activated just through this movement and the sort of elevation of presence in tuning into you, Wendy, and really like not just hearing you and seeing you, but really hearing you and
Yes.
see.
Yes. So that actually goes back to that whole feeling safe. So your body will only move in certain ways when you're safe. Think about like if you're not feeling safe and secure, you're going to be like hunched in. You're usually your eyebrows are really wide because you're taking in lots of information like for your safety. Um, but when you become engaged with someone in the conversation, like your face will start to soften up and there will be a heat, right? Because when you're colder and you're more like on alert, right? There's more attention and energy being directed to the parts that keep you alert. And then as you get safe, you energy flows back down into your body so you can feel more because you're not supposed to be paying attention to the way the gentle breeze is caressing your neck when you're getting chased by a lion.
Oh yeah, maybe that would be a bit distracting. You might get eaten.
Right?
Oh, so we've established we're not being chased by any lions,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Or
good.
maybe a cougar.
Babe. You're making me blush. It's hard to talk and blush at the same time. um, so we're not being chased by any lions or tigers, only cougars.
Cougar.
Oh God. Sorry. I just had a memory, and I'm just going to hold myself in that memory for a moment and let that go. Thank you. Oh my goodness. So somebody has written in and said, I'm frustrated that I wasn't present with with my cooking. and the deliciousness just turned into burnt shit. Oh no, I'm so sorry. Um,
Ah.
Leaning on your playfulness to perceive it more fluidly. Well, perchance your body was craving some carbon to soak up maybe some toxins in your gut that may or may not be there. And so serendipitously, the distraction caused the burning. I don't know. I'm making shit up. But
That's
that's
awesome.
really,
By the way, this real quick, I absolutely love that you just said that right now for so many reasons. Like, that was amazing. Like, my mind would have gone somewhere else, but that was just, oh, I love you, Avi.
I love you too, Wendy. Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, this sort of and then there's that. That's
Yeah.
what she said. And then there's that. So there's this space of, okay, when pain points happen, when experiences happen in our lives, and, we're human living in a super imperfect world as super imperfect humans, which is the great perfection, right? That acceptance and embracing of our imperfections being perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this kind of space where it's like, okay, I've had this negative experience, this painful experience, and I'm becoming aware of how it's moving or not in me, mind, body, emotions. And for me, I tend to, if it's like a strong emotion and like a cognitive, I want to rip the throat, kind of like, oh, golly, energy, if I just immediately breathe and come into my body and take that pause, then I can assess, okay, what's happening and then what's the gift? And
Yes.
so my hack into getting into pleasure while acknowledging and holding the pain is that dualistic experience of, wow, this steaming pile of shit actually has delivered a beautiful gift. And now my flowers are blooming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Or whatever,
You're right.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. I heard this from someone a long time ago, never waste a good trigger. And I
Like that.
I love it. Like if I get triggered, I'm like, what can I learn about myself today?
Yeah.
So it's like I'm like, oh my, there's a part of me that wants to heal. That's why it's getting triggered. Oh my gosh, yay,
Yeah.
I get to heal more of myself so I can be more of my essence, right? Because our bodies want to release the the burden of carrying so much pain so we
Yeah.
can step into receiving more pleasure.
Yes. So as a metaphysical healer, I'm like super sensitive. So I will become aware of incoming energies, pain, pleasure, neutral.
Mhm.
And they're kind of um like mini splinters in my energetic field.
Mm.
And and so I have like by necessity had to develop tools to help with that super sensitization of the energies. And I remember yesterday, actually, I received news that just went boom. And I knew that it was coming. I could feel the splinters of energy arriving, and I let it go. And I refocused on my body and I refocused on work and blah, blah, blah. There's plenty of blah, blah in the day, right? And then when that information came and hit me, I found it pleasurable.
Mm.
And this is really interesting to me because in similar situations in the past, when I've received these kinds of truths,
Mhm.
I found them painful. But with this kind of practice that we're both speaking into, I think that our practices are actually quite similar. And I know we're kind of like, what's the expression, flogging a dead donkey? But I really do feel like there's some really beautiful, juicy, simple tools here that we are repeating for those who are watching, who I know would really benefit from these abilities to pause and ask conscious questions of themselves, which bring them into pleasure.
Yes, exactly. I know it's funny, so much of the work I do, and I'm sure it's the same with you, it's actually quite simplistic practices that I also know from when I started going, oh yeah, I'll do that later. I'll do that later. Because like there's that belief, like, that's not gonna get rid of all this crap that's going on inside of me. Like there's no way that taking a walk is going to change my life, right? Like my life is way more complicated than taking a walk. But then I heard this, I think it was on Instagram or whatever, and they summed it up so well. Like, it's not necessarily that taking the walk is going to change your life, but it's 100% not going to make it worse, right?
Mm.
And the more you do those simple walks, those simple exercises, the simple breaths, the moments, the pauses, it's a cumulative effect that then changes your life.
I love that. I really feel that. And it is, it's like the practices are actually really simple, like taking a breath. We all breathe every day, but how are we breathing? Can we bring more awareness into what part of the lungs we're breathing into? Up, middle, lower, front, back, side. Like we have, the lungs are
Yeah.
all up in this torso, babe,
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, maybe that's super simple, but is it easy in that moment of trigger? No.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
So just because it's simple doesn't make it easy. But
Right.
sometimes I feel like if we can just get that one simple, challenging practice and just that one step, I feel that it really does transform my life for the better. It does bring me into a greater relationship that's joyful and harmonious with myself.
Yeah.
Instead of perceiving, we have a message
Yeah.
from David who says, instead of perceiving something as a problem, it can be an invitation to detox something that was inside trying to find a way out. I love that, David.
Yes. 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 That's exactly that's what a trigger is. That's why I like
Yeah.
never waste a good trigger.
So
um,
how can we support
right.
how can we support that movement? So if we're all in agreement that there's this trigger and it's an invitation into letting out something that wants to be released,
Right.
how can we be of service to ourselves in that moment?
So it's before the moment. It's what you just alluded to. It's that practicing conscious pleasure. When
Mm.
you practice conscious pleasure, it becomes a skill that you can actually tap into when you're stressed. When you are stressed, you cannot learn a new skill. You can only retrieve skills that you already have at your disposal. And
Mm.
that's like neuroscience, right? uh,
Yeah.
it's the way it's designed. There's a path towards the prefrontal cortex that specifically has us be able to pull on the skills that we already know, but they have to be so ingrained in our behavior that they don't take any extra effort or energy to utilize. To be conscious requires extra energy. So when you're in a stressed state, you will only be able to do things that do not require conscious awareness. And so that this is where practice comes in. Athletes know this. This is like, do you know anyone at the top of their game, actually in anything, any industry, anything that does not practice what they do? Like you have to
Mm.
practice to be good at what you do. So that way under times of pressure and stress, you can rely on those skills that you've already developed.
So what I hear you encouraging is that if this is something that you would like to cultivate in your life, practicing when you are in ease is the the line in the sand, which will either be the same kind of trigger response and reaction, or the ability to utilize skills which bring consciousness in because you're practicing consciousness. And we've already named a couple of things of really simple ways to practice consciousness, including pausing. Help me out here.
Yeah. So I find this like what I did just right there. This is like a super, super simple thing that I I find a very good first step for people, especially if they're really stressed. Now, for people who have really good embodiment practices, this might be more simplistic. But for the people who are watching who maybe aren't there yet, or still find themselves getting really triggered because they haven't made those shifts from in the embodiment practice to stress, is whenever you take a big deep breath in, like just focusing on where that breath is, and then just noticing the deep breath in, right? And then releasing the breath out. And what that happens is because when you get stressed, you take a deep breath in, right? So the
Mm.
more you practice paying attention to that deep breath in, then you can become aware of it later on when you're stressed because you are now in the habit of paying attention whenever you take a deep breath in.
Oh, I
And so,
love that.
yeah,
I
it's
love
like,
that. So,
yeah. So, and then you play around with what feels good on the release, right? So some people like these really deep, long releases. Some people that actually can create panic in their body.
mm.
And so there's no right or wrong, but it's about starting with something. So that's one of my tips is starting with that taking a deep breath and paying attention to where it feels. Because sometimes you'll notice like you can feel your breath like almost like all the way up in your throat, right? And then there's times where you take a deep breath in, you're like, oh, that stopped at my heart. Oh, actually, that stopped there, right? Like you start paying attention when you're practicing, right? In that conscious practice, right? And then what becomes pleasurable on the exhale out. And then when you're stressed, you start playing with what's pleasurable on the exhale out.
I'm loving the Mercury retrograde energies right now so much. David says, always calling us to cultivate higher states of love and forgiveness. Now, I love what you've said there, David. For my practice, I would change forgiveness into acceptance
Mm,
because what I've found is that when I accept the good, the bad, the ugly, that forgiveness is a byproduct. And when I hunt for forgiveness, there's this space of being wrapped up in the what went wrong
mm,
and the asking or taking of something, or when somebody is asking for forgiveness for something that from like they've done something and now they're asking for forgiveness, actually they're continuing to take from the person that they've harmed. So there's some very nuanced good, bad, and ugly within various practices of forgiveness. And I've found personally, and agree or disagree, it's just my experience that when I find acceptance, okay, this has happened. Right, now
yeah,
what? And that's that sort of again moving into that curiosity that you were speaking about earlier.
yeah. I want to play on your forgiveness, your definition of forgiveness and your thing because I this is something that I find really fascinating. It's partly why I use the science a lot, just FYI, because I like to with science you can define something and you can say
Mm.
what it means, and then people come from that reference point. Because to me, forgiveness is an act of self-compassion,
Mm.
right? Where it's about a like I only pay attention to forgiveness of self and not forgiveness of others because that's their journey, right? And I find that part of the reason why we are even looking for forgiveness is usually because there was an element where we did not speak up for ourselves. Because very rarely is forgiveness needed when you spoke up for your needs and had your like forgiveness is not needed when you spoke up and your needs were met. right?
Yes. Yes.
And
I
so it,
totally, yeah. Go on. No,
yeah.
no, go on.
And so anyways, it's so for I like, you can say self-compassion too, but like forgiveness is like an all-encompassing. It's the self-compassion, it's the acceptance, it's the understanding and the allowing of of all of that. In my mind, that's what forgiveness means. But everyone's
I love it because we've nested the same thing in
yeah.
different ways. So we're
Yeah.
talking about the same experience or journey in this forgiveness, acceptance, compassion, um, love in. Can I call it a cuddle puddle?
Yeah. Cuddle puddle of
You know,
self.
yeah, a cuddle puddle of self, and just to sort of bring in a bit of a vulnerable share, just to kind of bring it again out of the mind and back into sort of body.
Yeah.
Um, I went through probably 2018, however many years ago that was now. So in 2018, I went home and I visited family with my kids. And I remember very vividly sitting on the porch of a family home in DC and realizing that the child that I was felt responsible for all the bad stuff and that I had spent, all this time as an adult feeling that I was the one to blame, that I was the one responsible for all of that bad stuff that happened because I was placed in a position of over responsibility as a child. And it occurred to me in that moment, and what it was I was watching and really taking in this conversation between my children and um my sort of surrogate mother. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the way that she was listening and responding and feeding back and asking questions really brought forward the memory of her doing that with me when I was the same age.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, it just dawned on me, holy shit, I was just a kid. I was just a child. And in that moment of recognition and acceptance of the deeper truth, suddenly I realized it was never my fault, that
Mhm.
I was never to blame. Because one, I should never have been put in those positions of responsibility at such a young age. And two, it was never my fault. I didn't actually do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And just like that tiny epiphany completely transformed my biology. It completely transformed my relationship with myself and my family. And in that, this forgiveness for not even realizing that I was holding all of this blame and shame, and I should have known, could have known something better, because I was just a kid and actually I didn't know any better. And it was only really with the adult mind that I could see that and then hold that child that needed to be held. And I'm using this personal example just to kind of highlight these small places of consciousness. And because it's a very small moment. It wasn't any sort of, the sun didn't come out from behind the clouds and God didn't reach his finger. There was none of that stuff going on. It was literally just like oh. And I could feel my whole parasympathetic response. The tingles came, the tears came, the yawning came. And
Mhm.
just like that, this huge chunk of my healing was moved through and on to the next chunk.
I love that you said that. Yeah, I that is kind of it really taps into the whole conscious pleasure, actually, what you were saying right there, because it's that you could have just watched that moment and just been reactive, right? Like practicing your your behaviors of the past, right? Like and continuously practicing the same thoughts and practicing the same, you know, emotions and practicing the same, you know, whatever, right? But instead, you took a moment to consciously observe and be curious about the situation, right? Like there was a level of curiosity, like looking into, oh wow, yeah, huh. I was sitting there, right? And I was feeling these things and I was experiencing this. And I just love that's such a beautiful example of how then it actually like allows more pleasure to come through because then instead of just being in this reactionary state in that moment, you actually probably had some peace, I'm guessing.
Definitely had some peace.
Yeah.
as as opposed to peas with dinner, which yeah. Yeah, it's interesting sort of in this conversation as I'm getting curious with the story that I shared.
Mhm.
I'm aware, and again, I'm sharing this as modeled behavior. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just, I'm not sharing for the sake of sharing. There, there's sort of an example, yeah, that's coming through.
Yeah.
So in this conversation, there's this awareness that previous to that moment, my embodied reaction was jealousy. So it's
Mm.
not fair that that child, that person gets to have a parent that's not giving them those things, and they don't have to do. And now they're getting what and this like I don't have. I'm abandoned. I'm overworked. I'm being used. I'm blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
But instead of that being my response, because of actually the really deep love and pleasure I have for my children, and when I say pleasure, I mean like every parent I think can really align to this. When we watch our children play, when we watch our children enjoy, we feel joy. It's a byproduct of our biological connection and
Right.
energetic connections,
Yeah.
etc. And so it was really that mechanism of I love these people so completely. I
Mhm.
only want the best for them. So it doesn't matter what I've experienced in the past or what's going on right now. I'm just really present to what's bringing this moment into connection. And
Yeah.
it was that I don't know that it was curiosity as much as it was more like um, a wonderment, like, wow,
Wonder
there's
curious.
a little mini
Yeah.
me sitting in the same seat, having such a similar conversation. Wow. And then this waterfall of rewiring, which spontaneously happened.
Yeah. It's interesting when you were sharing this, I had a memory of something that I think kind of will encapsulate a lot of this too. So, how we were talking about how it's just about practicing, right? Like practicing different things. Some it's very hard to practice a response, that you're going to have. But one of the things that I pull on and I use in my daily life is what uh, sports athletes do, like the top of their game athletes. They imagine, like if they're a skier, they envision the slope and they imagine how their body's going to move, what they're going to do if something happens. They kind of like self-correct and they just keep envisioning it with different scenarios and so because they don't have an opportunity necessarily to go down the slopes, right? And so they really learn how to like kind of, you know, curiosity. I'm not even trying to say it. Like never mind. But they try to envision and creatively, you know, put forth many scenarios in their mind. And with my kids, I know that there are a lot of the work that I do actually stems from the fact that the way I behaved with my kids was not of the best nature. It was modeled after my parents, which was not of the best nature. And so I found myself always getting frustrated. And as I started bringing more of these like conscious, practices into my life, one of them was with my kids. And I know my son, he's got ADHD like me, and he forgets things, and assignments come up, and it's the last minute, and there's like all these like different things. And I've been trying to, this is a couple years ago, trying to figure out like ways to like incentivize him so that way maybe he would do the work, ahead of time. Not that that ever worked for me either, but like maybe I'll figure it out somehow. And there was a time where he had like a really one of his best friends was having a birthday, and he really, really wanted to go, but he needed to do his project beforehand. And I was not, I didn't want to be that mom just like pushing him, because, I wanted him to like learn how to do the stuff for himself. And of course he forgot, right? And he, and I knew this was going to happen. I knew he wasn't working on it. I'm like, okay, how am I going to respond? So I wanted to kind of like practice. And I was like, okay, once those once he starts freaking out, when he realizes what he's done, there's going to be big, huge emotions. So I am going to like take a moment, take that deep breath in, feel my feet on the floor, and I'm just going to hold him and let him experience those emotions. And then we'll figure it out together afterwards. Right. And that's exactly what happened, because I had a conscious practice ahead of time of how to deal with the situation that was coming up. And that was like a big pivotal moment for me, because it was the realization like, wow, this actually works. Like this whole like practicing things and doing things, you actually can do them then in the moment when you're stressed. And I've taken that into so many different areas of my life, in the pleasure, actual like physical body pleasure practices, all kinds of different areas. And I wanted to share that because I think sometimes we hear like, oh yeah, practice and think about it ahead of time. They're like, what does that really look like? And it's not like I figured every detail of it out. It was like, okay, what's something that I know is going to happen, and what can I think about and kind of like practice in my mind to like deal with that experience. And the more I do that, the easier it is. So when my kids freak out about the things that they usually freak out about, I am like, I already know how to do this because I've already practiced it like 5 times in my head, you know?
I love it. I
And then
love
as
it.
you do it in person, it becomes really solid. Like my older son now can be as emotional as he wants, and it does not phase me anymore. And I can just be that solid, sturdy presence for him to be able to emote as much as he needs.
Oh, I love that. That sounds like really amazing parenting, actually. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So, I know that we are coming up to the top of the hour. And for those of you who are watching, if any of this is resonant with you, or you have anything that you're working on in your life, any sort of, let's call them pain points that you would like, I don't know, any curiosity facilitating? Thing. It is now. And I welcome you to message it in the comments below, and we will speak to it. And if not, that's cool too. And if you're watching later and anything here is sparking something for you, I also welcome you to write in the comments, and both Wendy and I will see that and respond to it. And of course, direct you in various different ways that is unique to you and whatever you write in the comment section below. I'm in awareness of my like what's coming out of my mouth right now, and I'm like, really, Avi, you're all right. What do you need right now?
I that's like one of those worst things. You're like, I'm hearing myself speak. Okay, stop listening to yourself speak. You're still speaking. Stop listening. Just speak. Stop listening.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about this conversation so far is actually, well, one, hanging out with you, because I really do love hanging out with you. And two, what I love is that through our personal examples, I feel like the body of wisdom that we laid down at the beginning of this conversation, we've moved into real world examples of how to implement this conscious pleasure practice. Now, I kind of, in the last kind of 10, 15 minutes, want to turn it more toward sex.
Yes.
Because who doesn't like sex? And well, who of consenting adult age doesn't like
Yeah.
Nice.
Like, disclaimer.
Yeah, let me just put that one at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I know, like I'm an orgasm coach and it's funny sometimes I end up in these very ethereal conversations, right? Um, the there's the kind of like what we talked about even at the beginning, kind of understanding how the different elements of our body respond, especially because our emotions are so much a felt body experience, pleasure and sensual pleasure in particular. Like, and I do mean all the senses, but then if you can want to get really intense sensual pleasure, you're talking, sexual sensual pleasure. Doesn't mean you can't have it other ways, but the quickest way, because that's what I like being very efficient. I don't know if you noticed that. I like figuring out like how to actually do things, like not just hear theories, but like, okay, what do I do with it? Right. Um, it is about tapping into like consciously being aware of your true pleasure. And I find that so many people have developed, their own patterns of pleasure, however they may be, whether it's, grabbing a vibrator or watching porn and by the way, there's nothing wrong with any of this stuff. There's a time and a place for literally everything in this world. But that is going to be a repeat of like previous patterns. If you want to create those new pathways towards pleasure that you don't even know exist yet, you have to bring an element of consciousness. It has to be a self-directed, a pause, a breath, a connection to the self and to the sensations of your body in order to enhance and expand your pleasure pathways.
Mm. So I know within various tantric practices, especially neo-tantric practices, there's a variety of meditations and methods and practicing that directly involve the engagement of the sexual organs.
Yeah.
I'm curious because again, you are an orgasm coach
Yeah.
and you've worked directly with women who don't experience orgasm,
Yes.
coaching them into experiencing orgasm. So what are some practices that you recommend or coach to help women who are orgasmless into orgasm full?
Yeah. All right. So even though I do work with women who've never experienced an orgasm, I actually say the majority of my clients, it's not that they've never had an orgasm. It's just that maybe it takes them longer. Maybe they can't get out of their head. It's more of a like, it was easier when I was younger, but now it's not that I'm older. Kind of, or I'm just not in the mood anymore. Like, does that make sense? There's more of that,
Yeah.
like, or I've heard all of these like amazing, like mind-blowing orgasms and mine feel great, but am I missing something? Right? And which, by the way, if you have to ask that question, you are.
Take
Because
note.
I'm like, once you've had the full thing, like there's a reason why people who've had full body orgasms tell everybody and want to start becoming sex coaches and because they're like, holy crap, do you know what I was missing? Do you know what you're missing? All right. So with that being said, depending on where your issue is, if you're coming from that, like it is really, really difficult to orgasm, even by yourself, or it's difficult to orgasm with anything other than a vibrator. I'm going to use women in particular because the pathways are a little different, same, but different. Um, the biggest issue 90% of the time is feeling safe in your body to feel. And so where the practices that I really recommend and like see the biggest, I'm totally going to give this away right now. um, but it's about doing what feels good, and whether that is using the vibrator, or your fingers or whatever, the shower head, whatever it is, whatever your previous pattern of pleasure is, is while you're in it, telling yourself over and over and over again, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. And a little tidbit is for those triggers, like never waste a good trigger, right? When you notice that if you do that practice of seeing the trigger and noticing if it's usually a memory will come up with it and like what it is you wanted to feel, if you can, identify it, like be curious and identify what it is you want to feel and start bringing in that sensation into your orgasm practice and specifically into your orgasm practice. There's a point at which you orgasm in which the different parts of the brain become coherent together. And there's actually a heart brain coherence that happens. And it is a point in which neuroplasticity is heightened. And so you can create new thoughts and new behavior patterns in that moment of orgasm. And so, whatever your biggest struggle is, you can use orgasms to start healing that limiting belief or whatever that is.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. I know for myself, the practice, not specifically starting as a sexual practice or sensual practice, but just my practice with self-love for me was when I found myself in those triggers and acknowledging the sort of frozen child,
Mhm.
pausing and saying, hey, I see you, I hear you. How can I be of service? What do you need?
Mhm.
And that was my I'm safe.
Mhm.
Because I'm safe because I've been told so many times as a little one, you're safe, and then I get hit, or you're safe, and then something dangerous happens. So you're safe is not a safe feeling,
Right.
a pairing of words. It's wired to unsafety. And so this sort of hacking around into, again, through curiosity and self-compassion, all the beautiful things we've spoken into, finding my phrase of safety and then having that established in out of the bedroom and
Yeah,
then bringing that
exactly.
into oh.
Yeah.
And that's a yummy question in the bedroom. How can I
Mhm.
be of service to
Yes, it is. Oh, that's a whole nother activity and a whole nother hour.
Okay. Fair enough. So we are really at the top of the hour now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could keep talking to you forever, but
So much fun.
I think for today, we're gonna bring the conversation, wind it down. So I'd love to hear what I mean, I don't know, your wrap up. I don't even know how to phrase the question.
Um, Conscious pleasure, right? Like that's the topic.
Yeah, yeah.
My wrap up would be like develop, be curious about the practices that will help you to pause so you can consciously start bringing more pleasure into your life and moving away from the things that give you pain.
Mm. So cultivate a practice of curiosity.
Yeah, that's the
So
easiest way.
the conscious pleasure path is cultivating a practice of curiosity. Ah, I love that. And I really sincerely hope that all of you love it too, and that you've at least gotten one gold nugget from this really beautiful conversation. I know I've gotten a few. Wendy, thank you so much for having this conversation with me on Tantric Life Talks. And I so look forward to more conversations with you.
Thank you for having me. Great.
Yeah.
I will close. If I can. There it is. Wait, maybe I can't close. There's a way to do this. There we go. All right.